Your Fault is a song from the musical Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine. It arrives late in the show, at the moment when the magical world is collapsing and the characters must finally confront the consequences of their actions. What they do instead is what we too often do. They panic. They deny. They frantically reassign blame. Their voices layer and swirl into a frenetic chorus of self-exoneration and of casting aspersions. It is a musical embodiment of the desperate attempts to impose order on chaos, to locate a culprit or scapegoat for it, anyone but oneself. This year has had its fair share of chaos. The war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the stabbing of Irina Zarutska, the government shutdown, and a parade of other crises have stretched commentators across the political spectrum to their interpretive limits. Many of us have been trying and failing to fully explain the moment we are in. What emerges instead is a familiar chorus of your fault rhetoric. That theatrical mood, which is a reflection of us, has emerged in recent real-world discourse as cycles of blame. The aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination has crystallized a pattern of finger-pointing rhetoric. Commentators on both the left and the right assert, with similar conviction, that the other side's escalatory rhetoric has in some manner led to the killing. Each demands that the other bring the temperature down, yet interprets any moderation on their own side as concession and therefore strategic surrender. There is a strange, tragic irony here. Some members of both the left and right punditry are convinced that they are acting defensively, even righteously, and that the other is acting with reckless, incendiary intent. Neither is willing to choose the choice of the evergreen prisoner's dilemma, which would minimize the overall negative impact on all those involved. Rhetoric of blame saves face with one's audience, while rhetoric of cooperation is perceived as unilateral vulnerability. What neither side seems willing to acknowledge is their contribution to stochastic political violence. There is a subtle but real link between months and years of depicting opponents as existential dangers and the eventual emergence of someone unstable enough to believe the narrative literally. This phenomenon is not unique to one ideology. Many political commentators on both sides of the political spectrum do not acknowledge the link between instances of their rhetoric which repeatedly demonize individuals and instances of real violence towards those individuals.
Radicalization of everybody in online spaces and real life spaces is just getting ratcheted up more and more and more, and Trump is just pushing it further and further and further. And unless the Republicans are willing to actually say something about how everybody needs to calm down, it's just going to get worse and worse.
There's really no such thing as a nonviolent left. There's no such thing as a nonviolent left because the energy of disruption is sort of what defines leftism. And when you look at the mindset of the vampire, so to speak here, the mindset of the vampire is that he's above the law in a way. There's like he owns, he sort of, the leftist takes personal possession of the Schmittian exception, and he says, okay, according to all the rules and regulations, this thing is bad, but I'm going to do this bad thing because I'm aiming at a larger good. And in general, there's always sort of situations under which that moral logic can be correct, just as there's a, situation in which you might need to take, morphine for an operation. but also morphine is very pleasurable. And so the pleasure of saying, I'm above rules, I'm above laws, F having laws and rules and stuff, this is right, this person is bad, he's leading, the country in this wrong direction, and this thing that I do that is bad on the surface is going to be good, and that's, of course, the happy voice of Satan telling you that, the ultimate lesson in a way of leftism, or the spirit of leftism, which is sort of fundamentally atheistic, is that the atheist always makes himself into a god. And he's like, what would God do? God would strike down Charlie Kirk. God doesn't exist, so I'll do it.
A similar mood permeates the conversation around the New York mayoral race, particularly the right's reaction to the rise of Zohran Mamdani. To critics, the idea of electing an openly socialist mayor in the United States in 2025 feels absurd. They point, with no shortage of historical evidence, to the tragedies of 20th century socialist regimes. They emphasize the market rigidities that lead to shortfalls in housing, food supply, and economic opportunity. They insist that socialism harms the very people it claims to elevate. Lately, I have noticed a particular sentiment cropping up in conversations on the mayoral race, that perhaps Mamdani should be elected so New Yorkers and Americans can, quote, learn their lesson. I've heard people say, half joking and half serious, that maybe the only cure for flawed economic ideas is to let those ideas fail spectacularly. They suggest that the city should be allowed to hit economic rock bottom so the rest of the nation can observe the consequences and avoid similar mistakes. The left can echo this kind of thinking when discussing during election cycles the disproportionate federal funding which can flow to red states via the taxes of blue states. It's something like, let the red states suffer from their policies. It's never that simple. The substrata of this argument is the dark belief that the suffering of one's political opponents is a necessary step toward enlightenment.
And when the dollar collapses, and when all of these institutions that we have, no one trusts their institutions anymore, but yet the institutions keep pumping out madness. I would argue to you that it's probably better that we're worse off now so that we can feel the consequences more intensely. Because we have to realize we have done this to ourselves. And now we will bear the price. It's perfect to me. It's a kind of beauty to it. It is a kind of beauty. If someone sits around, is indolent, they just lay on their couch and they eat Doritos and Twinkies all day, there's a kind of perfection in there when they get diabetes and they go blind and they can't walk because they can't feel their feet. So just don't be surprised by any of it. Don't be surprised at the consequence of the of the fall of the dollar, of loss of fiat currency. Don't be surprised at any of these things. Just say, listen, I didn't have time. I was too busy working, whatever. There are consequences to your behavior. If you're going to sit and smoke or whatever, if you're going to print money like you're going crazy, if you're going to let people indoctrinate your kids or let in people who want to destroy and rip down the whole of Western civilization, there are consequences to that. So when those consequences hit you, deal with it like a man. Yeah, I smoked cigarettes like Hitchens. He dealt with it like a man when he had lung cancer. I don't regret it at all. That's how you should deal with it. Yeah, we let these people in. They had names. They destroyed the whole society. They turned it parallel courts, Sharia courts. Yep, we did it.
This is where the connection between these stories becomes clear. Whether the context in political violence or economic policy, the underlying sentiment is the same. They need to learn their lesson. I consider this phrase and feel something like despair, not triumph. There is a sense of realism I agree with. Actions do have consequences. But more than this, it implies a worldview in which harm is not just inevitable, but desirable as a teaching tool, a form of moral pedagogy. Extend this view far enough, and it becomes a recipe for endless escalation. If one side must learn a lesson, then the other will soon say the same. Each instance of pain becomes retroactively justified as educational. Each setback becomes proof that the other side was reckless. Each blow becomes the opening argument for the next blow. It is not a Jacob's ladder lifting us towards something higher. It is whatever the opposite of that is. A spiral staircase descending into hell, each step grounded by the assurance that they deserved it. There is a profound hypocrisy at work with this logic. Those who speak in this register believe they are warning of danger, not contributing to it. But, let's say, punitive enlightenment, the strategy of let them suffer until they understand, is the very logic that perpetuates the political pendulum. It ensures that every swing of the political climate becomes justification for the next dramatic rebuttal. Those with opposite temperament to oneself and with adversarial political belief will find explanation in one's rhetoric for the next disagreeable state of affairs and will point the finger at you, claiming you need to learn your lesson. And thus the pendulum will swing again. If we are to escape this self-perpetuating cycle, we will need something more ambitious than calling out the other side. We will need to resist the seductions of simple narratives that assure us that all bad outcomes flow from their mistakes and all good outcomes from our intentions. Politics need not be zero-sum. Political opponents need not be existential threats. We will need, instead, a shared commitment to some pragmatic values. Reducing harm is more important than scoring rhetorical points. Complexity is not concession. Disagreement is not villainy. That the purpose of political engagement is not to teach our opponents a painful lesson, but to build a society in which fewer lessons need to be taught through pain at all. A healthier political culture will not emerge from utopian naivete, nor from asking people to mute their convictions. Rather, it begins with learning to distinguish critique from condemnation. De-escalatory rhetoric doesn't mean softening our views or refusing to name harmful policies. Rather, it means refusing to turn political opponents into moral caricatures whose suffering becomes desirable or deserved. We ought foster a disciplined insistence on specificity, on criticizing beliefs, proposals, and their consequences on human well-being, rather than assigning a malevolent essence to the people who hold them. This shift also requires a small, but perhaps radical, act of imagination, assuming that the person on the other side of a conversation is motivated by some mixture of hopes, fears, and incomplete knowledge, not fundamentally different from our own. We can learn to speak in ways that illuminate rather than inflame, that invite correction and progress rather than retaliation and dehumanization, thus opening space for cooperation even amid deep disagreement. This is not a call to silence conflict, but to humanize it so that political struggle becomes something other than a cycle of vindication that no one actually learns from. If the pendulum must swing back and forth, let us dampen the oscillations rather than amplify them. Perhaps we can learn, before catastrophe forces us to, that the cycle of blame, suffering, vindication, and counter-vindication is not inevitable. It is a choice we can decline, and it is a choice we should decline. Perhaps this is why Into the Woods feels relevant now. After the frantic chaos of your fault, the characters eventually stop pointing fingers long enough to recognize that blame cannot rebuild what has been broken. Their world only begins to heal when they choose responsibility over recrimination, cooperation over vindication. We are, of course, not living in a fairy tale, and the giants in our world do not vanish with a clever spell. But we do share one essential truth with Sondheim's characters. Chaos will always invite us to cast blame, yet our future depends on resisting that impulse. If we can learn to face the forest together, instead of shouting within it, we might yet find our way out. I'm John Hoelzer. Thanks.